From the News Channel 5 Network, this is Morning Line.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us on Morning Line. Nick Beres here on a Monday, and glad to have you. Hope you had a good weekend. And we've got a topic this morning that we're going to get into with two very learned guests. We're going to take your phone calls as well. We're going to be remembering, as you see on the screen there, John Seigenthaler. The phone number there on the screen. If you'd like to join in the conversation, we're going to get into it. If you have any thoughts, questions about this man and his fantastic career and all that he achieved here and what he meant to Middle Tennessee and the country as a whole, feel free to join us here, and I'm going to sit back and listen too. I had the honor of meeting him on a few occasions. He'd actually been on this program before, but I did not know the man the way our two guests do, and I'm glad to have them both. You'll recognize them both. News Channel 5 political analyst Pat Nolan. Good morning to you, Pat. Hi. Chief Investigative Reporter Phil Williams. Thank you both, gentlemen, for coming on this morning. As we know, later this morning at 10 o'clock will be the memorial service for John Seigenthaler. We will be covering that both here on the Plus and streaming video live if you want to follow that. But I know both of you knew him fairly well. And we're going to get to a piece that you put together that aired last week, Phil. But first, just your thoughts this morning, Pat.
Well, it's the loss of a Nashville icon that certainly had major national repercussions.
Sure.
We were talking before we went on. John sort of had 3 or 4 different careers. I mean, he was a reporter in Nashville, then he went off to work for Bobby Kennedy in the Justice Department, was involved with the Freedom Riders, almost lost his life doing that, came back to become the editor of the paper, later publisher, had an impact on every political race in Tennessee over the next 40 to 50 years after that. After he finished at the Tennessean, he became the founding editorial director at USA Today and sort of set the path for that national publication. Also was involved with the Freedom Forum, the First Amendment Center, which at Vanderbilt holds his name. That's where he laid his state yesterday. And John was so involved in so many civic things as well. He had enough on his plate, even at age 86, to put somebody who was 20 years his senior under. I mean, he just had a tremendous schedule, tremendously involved in everything.
Yeah, I attended the visitation yesterday, as did you, and I was really struck as I waited in line for an hour and a half almost.
Wow.
By how many people in this community were touched by this man. Mm-hmm. There were federal judges in this line, there were state judges, there were prosecutors, the Attorney General was there was a member of the state Supreme Court, there were civil rights activists in the line. Mm-hmm. Just people from all walks of life who, because of the way that John was, each of them felt like they had a personal connection to John Seigenthaler.
Sure, and I'm wondering too, now with his passing, if there was a segment of the population, I'm sure that maybe had heard the name John Seigenthaler, but I'm just talking about the average individual, maybe not in the journalism business or in the law, who now is aware of this man that wasn't before.
Oh, I'm sure, and I had this situation reading the obit pieces that were in the Tennessean. There were some things about that happened in his life that I was not aware of. I was aware of the major thrusts of all the things that were involved, but there were always individual details about things he was involved with that I didn't know. He had an amazing life. I mean, one of the things he did was host that Word on Word show over on public television. He did that for 42 years, and he did it as a volunteer. And he would interview these hosts, and I used to marvel because I host a show here, and occasionally we have book authors on, and I try to read the book before they come on. John would probably have these people come in, particularly during the Southern Festival of Books. He might bring 5 or 6 people in a given day and interview them back to back to back to back with 5 or 6 books. I don't know how he kept them all straight. Mm-hmm. I told him that, and I had stories of him going down the street, stopping his car, pulling out the book, annotating it, writing down things that he'd be thinking about that he wanted to say. Yeah. He read all the books, he did them, and he did them all as a volunteer.
Yeah, the thing that was incredible about that, he always carried a book with him. You can fake those kind of interview shows if you want to. John never faked it.
He always, when he had a guest that came on that had written a book, he always read it.
Absolutely.
Always read it. That was one of the things I read in the obit in the Tennessee, and his wife would say that their bedspread has ink stains on it because he always went to bed with a book, and he always read. Phil, you worked with him, right?
I did.
And I was just wondering, like I said, I had only met him a couple of times. Always such a very friendly, gracious guy. I mean, here's a guy who you could assume would think, he knows so many important people, does so many important things, and couldn't have been nicer in terms of, like, this is John Seigenthaler. He was even complimentary after one of the shows he came on years ago with me when I didn't know what the heck I was doing. He was very nice and encouraging. I'm just wondering, I was trying to get, did you ever see the stern side of him?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, I want to know about that, because that's something I never saw. And I know he had to have it, but he seemed to have such a tender heart and cared for people. But what about when did he suffer fools?
If you messed up, you never wanted to mess up again.
He let you know about it, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
But I mean, you messed up, and he just didn't expect it to happen again. But I mean, he was.
There were several occasions when I thought, well, come morning, I'm not sure I'm going to have a job still. But you know, there was an investigation that I did, and. We can save this story for later, just jump into it.
Well, go ahead, because we're going to run the obit piece in a moment. Go ahead.
When I was a young reporter, John wanted me to go undercover inside a couple of local gambling clubs because they were being run by Tommy Boner, who was the brother of then Mayor Bill Boner.
Gotcha.
And the implication was that the police were turning a blind eye. So John did it in style, shall we say. I had to set up a fake identity as someone who was in marketing from Knoxville. Called up South Central Bell, as it was then, and set up a Knoxville phone number that rang at my apartment in case anyone wanted to call and check on this fake identity. I rented a Cadillac, so I appeared to have money. Got a suite at the Opryland Hotel, and then John came in and said, call this person, and this person will get you into the club. Wow. And so to get into the club, John had arranged through some source for a stripper to show up at my hotel room and pick me up as an out-of-town businessman, and she got me into the gambling clubs.
Holy cow!
And so you know, and we were able to do the story. Well, the story was going to run on a Sunday, and on Saturday night, John called and wanted me to read the story to him. You know, before the days of the internet where you could just email it. And I started reading the story, and it got to one of the clubs, and one of the clubs had machines, and John suddenly stopped me and said, did you get paid off on the machines? It's like, no, John, I tried. I kept losing all night long. and he started screaming at me over the phone. It's like, how can we say this is gambling when you didn't get paid off? Oh. And I remember replying to him, it's like, John, I lost. That's why they call it gambling.
Exactly, exactly.
And,
he wanted you to win.
And so because I didn't get paid off, I thought, oh no, I am in such trouble. And then, of course, on Sunday morning he called me, and you were back on John's good side when he called you pal.
Yeah.
And so he called and it's like, pal, that was a great story. Dolores loved it, talking about his wife. So if Dolores loved it, then you were good. You were good.
That is, you know, and it was interesting, and something else I just learned. It talked about when Gannett purchased the Tennessean, and everyone was worried about tight purse strings, and he still told his reporters, because what you just described there, Phil, is no expense was spared to do good journalism the right way. And he said he kept doing that and telling the reporters, even though Gannett was talking about tightening things, he said, you guys still go out there and spend it. I don't care. Just go and do what you have to do. Turn it into them so they know what it costs to do good journalism.
Yeah, well, when I was, again, a young reporter, I had a major investigation that was a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize, and money was not an object. Yeah. I got a tip on something happening in South Carolina, and rather than having to get it approved, John just said go. So I went to the airport, bought a day of ticket, which was not cheap, and flew to South Carolina, rented a car, rented a hotel room for several days. So, I mean, he knew that good journalism did not come cheap.
And as you well know, those were the days.
Right.
It's unfortunate. It's not quite like that anymore. Listen, we're going to have to go to the break. Mary, did we want to go to the obit as we go to the break? Let's do that. This is a piece put together to give some of you who maybe don't know all these details a little more about John Seigenthaler, and then we'll come back and continue our conversation with our guests and take some of your phone calls. But let's have a look.
John Seigenthaler spent a lifetime defending America, its people, its rights, and its freedoms. He worked as a newspaper reporter, editor, and publisher, served time in the Kennedy administration, and founded the First Amendment Center at Vanderbilt University. A 1945 graduate of Nashville's Father Ryan High School, Seigenthaler enlisted in the Air Force. When his tour ended, he came home and landed his first job with the hometown newspaper, the Tennessean.
I'd be out there on the firing line, and there'd be something I thought ought to be covered. You go to the editor, and the editors would say, go.
There's a kid who has a story to tell, find it.
In 1953, Seigenthaler investigated a man who had disappeared from Nashville 22 years earlier and found him living in Texas. And his stories about corruption inside the Teamsters Union led to congressional hearings and the impeachment of a Tennessee judge.
It's not for me to say.
It was during that time that Seigenthaler met a beautiful singer. Dolores Watson would become his beloved wife and mother of a future journalist, John Michael Seigenthaler.
I knew that our lives were different from a very early age. I knew that it was different in part because every night at the dinner table we would discuss what was going to be in the morning paper.
This was 1960 in Los Angeles.
But his father heard the call for public service, going to work in the early 60s for Attorney General Bobby Kennedy. In 1961, President Kennedy sent Seigenthaler to join the Freedom Riders through Alabama.
We can't stand at the state line in Alabama and say, keep out. They have a right to come in.
In Montgomery, when an angry mob turned violent, Seigenthaler was struck behind the ear with a pipe, knocking him unconscious.
And I had never been knocked out in my life. And I was out for 25 minutes. They kicked me under the car. And
still, Seigenthaler's calling in life was journalism. He returned to Nashville as editor of the Tennessean, later becoming publisher. He and his reporters tackled serious stories, changing laws, and making a difference.
Oh, he's almost an absolutist in the public's right to know and have information so they can make wise choices and decisions about public officials or about laws or about anything else that affects their lives.
After retiring from the newspaper, Seigenthaler founded the First Amendment Center, becoming a vocal defender of our country's most basic freedoms.
But I think the First Amendment Center does reflect a lot of what I hope I was about. Free and open and reliable and accountable information protected by the First Amendment.
John Seigenthaler, a mentor to many he leaves behind, was 86.